In this example video, we're going to look at brief exercises 822 and 823, which is dealing with constrained resources and demands. So they tell us that the Comfy Fit company manufactures two types of university sweatshirts, the Swoop and the Rufus. They have unit contribution margins of $5 and $15 respectively. And remember, a contribution margin is the difference between the sales price per unit and the variable cost per unit. Regardless of the type, each sweatshirt must be fed through a stitching machine to affix the appropriate university logo. The firm leases 7 machines that each produce 1,000 hours of machine time per year. Each Swoop sweatshirt requires 6 minutes of machine time, and each Rufus sweatshirt requires 20 minutes of machine time. And they tell us kind of how to round our answers. So in this case, we have a constrained resource. We only have 7,000 of machine hours available in a year. And every one of those sweatshirts have to be using that machine. So we need to decide what is the best or most optimal sales mix for our company based on this information. So in brief exercise 822, it says assume that there are no other constraints. The only constraint we have is that resource constraint of those 7,000 hours. So we need to look at how much time each one of these sweatshirts is taking. So we know our Swoop sweatshirt takes 6 minutes through that stitching machine, and there's 60 minutes an hour. And remember, that's what our constraint is, the number of hours available. And our Rufus sweatshirt takes 20 minutes in the stitching machine, and that takes 0.33 hours to get through. So, contribution margin per unit. They told us up here that our contribution margin for the Swoop was 5 and our Rufus was 15. So if we were purely looking at contribution margin per unit, we would say that we should only make the Rufus. But remember, we have a constrained resource, and that constrained resource is the number of machine hours that we have during the year. So we are going to put in the amount of a fraction of an hour that each one of these use. So we take our contribution margin per unit divided by, in this case, the fraction of time, because we had to put it into a fraction of an hour because that's what our resource constraint is hours. So that means that for the Swoop sweatshirt, we make $50 per machine hour of time. On the Rufus, we only make $45 per hour of machine time. So when we're looking at this, if we have no other constraint, the only constraint that we have is a resource, we want to go with whichever resource, whichever product would give us the most money per constrained resource. So in this case, my Swoop sweatshirt is going to make us more money per hour. So with no other constraints, that means we should be spending as much time as possible making the Swoop sweatshirts only. So our constrained resource was our machine hours. We lease 7 machines that each get 1,000 hours of machine time, or 7,000 in total. So we have 7,000 machine hours available, and we're saying that each one of our Swoop sweatshirts takes 0.10 of a fraction of an hour of time to go through that stitching machine. So if we divide the two, it tells us how many Swoop sweatshirts we can make in that 7,000 hours. So our optimal sales mix would be to make 7,000 Swoop sweatshirts and 0 Rufus sweatshirts, because we're making more money per hour with the Swoop than we are with the Rufus, which means our total contribution margin at that optimal level would be the 70,000 Swoop times, and now we go back to our per unit contribution margin, times that $5. So, or in total, $350,000 as our optimal sales mix would generate for us as a contribution margin. Utilizing the same information in brief exercise 823, it's saying all that information stays the same. However, let's assume that there's a maximum of 4,000 units of each sweatshirt that can be sold. So now we have two constraints. We have a resource constraint, the 7,000 hours of machine time that's available to us, and we have a demand constraint. We can only sell a total of 40,000 sweatshirts of whatever type. We can only sell 40,000 max of each type. So it would make no sense for me to make 70,000 swoop sweatshirts if I can only sell 40,000 of them. So now we have to decide again what our optimal sales mix would be. So what is our contribution margin per machine time of hour? We already know that. We calculated that from before. So our swoop is $50 per hour, and our Rufus is at $45 per hour. We calculated that above. So now that means that we want to make as many sweatshirts that we can sell of the item that we make the most per of our hour in this case, which is our resource constraint. So we make the most per hour under the swoop sweatshirt. So we want to make as many as we can sell of that swoop sweatshirt. So we have 40,000 units to be sold of the swoop, and each one of those we know takes a fraction of an hour to make. So that means if we made all 40,000 swoop sweatshirts that we can sell, it would take 4,000 machine hour time. So that means if I use 4,000 machine hours, that leaves me with 3,000 hours left to make Rufus sweatshirts. 3,000 hours that we have divided by the 0.33 fraction of an hour that it takes. And we round to our nearest whole item here. We could make 9,091 Rufus sweatshirts. So with the 4,000 machine hours, we could make the full demand of the 40,000 units of swoop, which makes us more money per constraint resource, which is our hours. And that still leaves us with 3,000 hours left of machine time. So then we can use those remaining hours to make however many Rufus sweatshirts that we can make. So therefore, our total contribution margin at our optimal sales mix would be the 40,000 swoop sweatshirts at $5 per unit and the 9,091 Rufus sweatshirts at $15 per unit. Don't forget that when you're looking for the contribution margin in total at the optimal sales mix, we are always using the per unit contribution margin, not the per hour contribution margin. So that means our total contribution margin at this optimal sales mix would be $336,365. A little bit less than what we would make if we were selling all 70,000 of the swoop, but remember, if we have a demand constraint, we can't sell that many, it wouldn't make any sense for us to make that many.